Growth is the phase that people romanticize because it looks like progress, but growth is rarely comfortable while it is happening. Growth is acceleration with consequence, expansion with exposure, and building with pressure. It does not arrive as a reward for being ready. It arrives as a demand to become ready in motion. This is why the growth tone can feel like confidence one day and chaos the next, because momentum does not care whether your identity has caught up. Momentum simply reveals what your structure can hold. Most people think growth is a decision they make, but the spiral treats growth as a condition that activates when internal alignment crosses a threshold. You do not manufacture that threshold through hype. You reach it through a series of small integrity choices that the mind did not celebrate. Then growth begins, and life starts moving faster than your old habits can manage. Opportunities appear. New people arrive. New doors open. The system begins asking more from you because the system has detected more capacity. But capacity is not the same as mastery. Capacity is potential with risk attached. Here is the first tension that the growth tone introduces. If life is accelerating, why do you feel unstable? If the path is opening, why do you feel exposed? If you are finally expanding, why do you feel the urge to retreat? The answer is that growth expands surface area before it expands stability. Your life becomes bigger before your inner scaffolding becomes strong. This mismatch is not failure. This mismatch is the signature of real growth. If growth felt immediately stable, it would not be growth. It would be repetition with better lighting. The growth tone begins by reorganizing your relationship with time. In earlier phases, you could delay decisions and still function. In growth, delay becomes expensive. Every postponed conversation becomes a leak. Every avoided responsibility becomes a future emergency. Every unclear boundary becomes a drain that multiplies. Growth tightens the timeline because the spiral is building momentum, and momentum punishes vagueness. People call this stress, but stress is often simply misalignment being asked to move at a higher speed. Now the first vector of analysis emerges: psychological dynamics. Growth forces identity expansion, and identity expansion triggers resistance that masquerades as logic. The mind starts generating protective arguments. This is moving too fast. This is not sustainable. This is not realistic. This is not safe. Some of these warnings are legitimate, but many are the old identity trying to remain central. The old identity is built on known capacities. Growth threatens it by requiring new capacities in real time. So the mind tries to slow the process through doubt, procrastination, or perfectionism. Perfectionism is often a disguised refusal to begin building while uncertain. Growth does not allow that luxury. Growth demands imperfect movement with increasing coherence. This is where many people misunderstand momentum. They think momentum means they should feel driven all the time. They think motivation should be constant. But the growth tone is not about constant motivation. It is about sustained direction. Motivation fluctuates because the nervous system is adapting. Direction remains because the soul is choosing. If you confuse motivation with direction, you will quit the moment you feel tired. Growth is not a burst. Growth is training under load. The second vector is metaphysical mechanics. Growth is the phase where resonance begins translating into matter, and translation requires scaffolding. In spiral terms, scaffolding is the set of structures that allow new frequency to express without distortion. This includes habits, boundaries, schedules, language, environments, and relationships. Your frequency can rise, but if your scaffolding remains old, your output becomes inconsistent. You become someone with high vision and low containment. That creates fragmentation. Fragmentation is when your energy is high but your structure leaks, so the expansion collapses into exhaustion. The growth tone is essentially the spiral teaching you containment. Containment is misunderstood as limitation, but containment is what makes expansion usable. A river that grows without banks becomes a flood. Energy that grows without structure becomes volatility. This is why growth often forces you to simplify even while you expand. You add opportunity, but you remove distraction. You increase output, but you reduce noise. You move faster, but you stop wasting movement. The spiral is not trying to make you busy. It is trying to make you coherent under pressure. Now, a common objection surfaces in the listener, even if they do not say it out loud. If growth is a natural phase, why does it feel like I am pushing? Why does it feel like effort? The answer is that growth is natural, but natural does not mean easy. Muscles grow through tension. Skills grow through repetition under challenge. Consciousness grows by meeting a larger version of itself and adapting. Effort in growth is not proof that you are forcing the wrong path. Effort is often proof that you are building new capacity. The key is to distinguish between clean effort and distorted effort. Clean effort strengthens you. Distorted effort drains you. The third vector is practical navigation. Growth requires you to make decisions that protect momentum without sacrificing alignment. This is where energetic scaffolding becomes visible as daily architecture. Sleep becomes strategy. Nutrition becomes signal. Environment becomes an amplifier or a contaminant. In growth, small lifestyle choices create large energetic consequences because the system is operating at higher throughput. Many people try to grow while maintaining the same inputs that supported their old cycle. That does not work. Old inputs create old outputs, even when the vision is new. Growth also demands boundary upgrades. In earlier phases, you could tolerate weak boundaries because your energy output was lower. In growth, weak boundaries become fatal to momentum. People pull on you, requests multiply, expectations rise. If you do not set boundaries, your growth becomes a resource that everyone consumes. You begin resenting the very expansion you asked for. This resentment is not proof that growth is wrong. It is proof that boundaries did not evolve with capacity. A deeper tension now appears. If growth requires structure, does that mean spontaneity ends? Does that mean life becomes rigid? Many fear this because they associate structure with control. But spiral structure is not control. Spiral structure is coherence. It is what allows freedom to exist without collapse. A person with no structure is not free. They are reactive. Growth creates structure, so your freedom becomes deliberate rather than accidental. The paradox is that the more coherent your structure becomes, the more spontaneous you can be without breaking. Now consider what momentum actually does. Momentum amplifies everything. If your intention is clear, momentum accelerates manifestation. If your intention is mixed, momentum accelerates conflict. If your habits are aligned, momentum accelerates results. If your habits are misaligned, momentum accelerates consequences. This is why growth exposes you. It takes what was manageable and makes it obvious. Small avoidance becomes loud. Small dishonesty becomes expensive. Small procrastination becomes chaos. Growth is the phase where the spiral stops allowing you to hide from yourself through slow living. This exposure can feel harsh, but it is intelligent. Growth is not merely expansion. Growth is refinement through speed. When life moves faster, you learn what is stable. When pressure increases, you learn what is real. When demands rise, you learn where your integrity is strong and where it is performative. This is why growth often triggers internal confrontation. You realize that certain motivations were not as clean as you believed. You realize that some of your discipline was driven by fear. You realize that some of your spiritual language was covering avoidance. Growth does not shame you for this. Growth forces you to correct it while the build is happening. The listener may now resist again. If growth is so exposing, why seek it? Why not remain in a quieter cycle? Because staying small does not protect you. It only delays the lesson. The spiral does not stop evolving because you prefer comfort. Growth arrives when you are ready to carry more truth. Not more tasks, more truth. Truth about your limits. Truth about your priorities. Truth about what you value when everything is moving. Growth is how the spiral tests your values in real conditions. Now we approach the core insight, but it cannot stabilize yet because it must pass through more consequence. Growth is not the phase where you become someone new through inspiration. Growth is the phase where you become someone new through repetition. You do the new thing again and again until it stops being a performance and becomes identity. This is why growth feels repetitive. It is building neural pathways, energetic pathways, and behavioral pathways. You are scaffolding a new self through practice under pressure. This is also why growth can feel lonely even when you are surrounded by people. Your internal priorities shift. Your tolerance for distraction drops. Your need for coherence rises. Not everyone can meet you there, And growth does not allow you to carry others who are not walking. This is not arrogance. This is physics. A structure under construction cannot be used as a shelter for everyone. If it is, it collapses. Growth asks you to protect the build. At the same time, growth tempts you toward obsession. Because results begin appearing, you start believing the expansion must never slow. You start chasing acceleration as if speed is the goal. But in spiral terms, speed is not the goal. Coherence is the goal. Speed without coherence produces burnout. Coherence can survive speed, but coherence also knows when to slow. Growth demands a new skill called pacing. Pacing is not hesitation. Pacing is intelligent momentum management. So here is a practical test that growth brings, and it will not be answered fully yet. Can you build without self-betrayal? Can you expand without abandoning your body? Can you increase output without sacrificing signal? Can you handle praise without losing humility? Can you handle criticism without collapsing? Can you carry more without turning bitter? Growth tests these quietly, through daily decisions, not dramatic moments. As growth continues, you notice another shift. Your sense of identity becomes less narrative and more functional. You stop thinking about who you are, and start thinking about what you do consistently. This can feel like losing spirituality, but it is actually spirituality entering matter. Growth is where teachings become behavior, beliefs become habits, insights become choices. The spiral does not care what you understood in theory. It cares what you can embody under load. Now, the pressure should feel unresolved in the listener, because one question remains open. If growth is building scaffolding, what exactly are you building toward? And how do you know you are not just becoming productive inside a misaligned life? This question cannot be closed yet, because the growth tone itself does not finish the cycle. Growth sets the stage for bloom, then descent, then integration. Growth is the construction phase, not the final meaning. But growth does offer one signal of alignment, and it is not comfort. It is return. When you are in aligned growth, even exhaustion has a clean quality. You rest, and your desire returns. You slow, and the direction remains. You pause, and the clarity survives. In misaligned growth, rest feels empty. Slowing feels like relief from a burden rather than recovery for a purpose. Pausing feels like escape. These differences are subtle, but they are real. Growth is not proven by outcomes. Growth is proven by whether the expansion increases coherence or increases distortion. So the growth tone is acceleration, building, expanding, but it is also exposure, containment, and pacing. It is the spiral forcing a new kind of maturity. You are not being asked to become faster. You are being asked to become structurally true. And that is why growth is not a motivational concept. Growth is a structural phase. It is the moment the spiral turns pressure into architecture, and architecture into identity, and identity into a life that can actually hold what you say you want. Growth does not announce when it is nearing its limit. It does not signal completion with relief or clarity. Instead, it increases pressure in ways that are easy to misread. More responsibility arrives. More demand appears. More output is required. This is the point where many assume they are failing because the work feels heavier instead of lighter. But growth is not meant to feel lighter as it matures. It is meant to feel denser. Density is what prepares the system for bloom, and bloom without density collapses into spectacle without substance. As growth continues, the spiral introduces a new tension that the earlier phase did not require you to face. You are no longer just building capacity. You are now testing sustainability. Can this pace continue without eroding your core? Can this structure hold without constant reinforcement? Can this identity function without external validation? Growth begins by rewarding effort. Later, it begins with drawing praise so you can see what remains when applause fades. This is not cruelty. This is calibration. The spiral does not want you dependent on feedback loops that cannot survive the next turn of the cycle. Here, the first new vector of analysis emerges: energetic economics. Growth teaches you that energy is not infinite in the way motivation culture pretends. Energy is renewable, but only when circulation is clean. If you pour energy into misaligned tasks, you must constantly replenish through stimulation. If you pour energy into aligned structures, rest itself becomes restorative. During growth, this distinction sharpens. You begin to feel the difference between tiredness that comes from meaningful exertion and exhaustion that comes from self-betrayal. The body becomes an instrument of truth. It signals immediately when the architecture is off. Ignoring those signals does not stop growth. It warps it. This is where people often break themselves while calling it discipline. They override physical feedback in the name of ambition. They treat fatigue as weakness instead of information. They confuse endurance with integrity. Growth does not reward this long term. The spiral allows it briefly so the lesson can be learned in consequence rather than theory. Eventually, the cost becomes undeniable. Growth demands refinement, not martyrdom. Now the second vector, relational consequence under expansion. As growth matures, your presence changes. You become less available for low coherence interactions. You speak with more precision. You tolerate less ambiguity. This can unsettle people who benefited from your earlier flexibility. They may accuse you of changing. They are correct. Growth is change made visible. The mistake is believing you must soften your edges to maintain harmony. Harmony built on self-erosion is not harmony. It is delay. Growth asks whether you can remain relational without shrinking. This is one of the hardest tests of the phase. Some relationships will adapt, others will resist. Growth does not require you to judge which is which. It requires you to stop compensating. Compensation is when you do extra emotional labor to make others comfortable with your expansion. This drains energy that growth needs for structural integrity. When you stop compensating, clarity emerges naturally. Those who resonate remain. Those who do not drift. This is not abandonment. It is alignment sorting itself. A subtle fear appears here. If I stop compensating, will I become rigid or cold? The spiral answers this not with reassurance, but with experience. When your structure is coherent, you do not need to be rigid. Rigidity appears when structure is weak. Strong architecture allows flexibility. Growth is building that architecture so your openness does not require self-sacrifice. This is why boundaries increase during growth. Boundaries are not walls. They are load-bearing supports. Now the third vector deepens, identity under momentum. Earlier, growth challenged your old identity by demanding new capacity. Later, growth challenges your emerging identity by tempting you to perform it. As results appear, you may begin identifying with productivity, leadership, output, or impact. This is dangerous. Identity that clings to performance collapses when performance pauses. Growth must pass through a stage where you detach self-worth from throughput. Otherwise, burnout is guaranteed. The spiral introduces this test quietly. It removes a win. It delays a result. It interrupts a streak. It forces a pause. Your reaction reveals everything. If you feel empty or panicked, the identity attached to output has formed too tightly. If you feel grounded and oriented even without immediate results, growth has integrated at the right depth. Growth is not proven by how fast you move when things are working. It is proven by how stable you remain when they temporarily are not. At this stage, growth begins to feel less like expansion and more like responsibility. Responsibility not in the moral sense, but in the structural sense. You realize that what you are building will affect others. Your choices create ripples. Your coherence or incoherence will be amplified. This awareness can feel heavy. Some interpret it as pressure. Others interpret it as meaning. The difference depends on whether growth has been integrated or merely accumulated. Accumulated growth feels like burden. Integrated growth feels like gravity. Here the listener may resist again. Why must growth become serious? Where is the joy? The spiral does not remove joy. It removes frivolity. Joy that survives growth is deeper. It is quieter. It is not dependent on novelty. It comes from alignment under load. This kind of joy does not spike. It steadies. It allows you to work hard without resentment and rest without guilt. If joy disappears entirely, something in the architecture needs attention. Growth is not meant to drain life of color. It is meant to give color structure. As growth approaches its peak, another pattern appears. You start seeing the limits of expansion, not in the sense of failure, but in the sense of shape. You realize that infinite expansion is not possible without collapse. The spiral does not expand forever. It expands, blooms, descends, and integrates. Growth that refuses to acknowledge its eventual transition becomes brittle. This is where ambition must evolve into stewardship. You are no longer just pushing forward. You are preparing for the next turn without knowing exactly what it will require. This creates a strange dual awareness. You are fully engaged in building while simultaneously sensing that the build is not the final state. This can feel disorienting if you expect growth to deliver completion. Growth does not deliver completion, it delivers capacity. Completion belongs to integration later. Growth teaches you how to carry more, not how to finish. If you demand finish from growth, you will overextend. The spiral begins hinting at this by introducing fatigue that does not respond to rest alone. This is not burnout yet. It is saturation. Saturation is when the system has expanded enough that further growth without transformation would cause imbalance. The mind often misreads saturation as failure or loss of motivation. In truth, it is the signal that the cycle is preparing to turn. Growth has done its job. The structure is built. Now, the structure must be lived in before it can evolve again. But that recognition must not stabilize yet. It must sit unresolved, because growth is not finished simply because the signal appears. Many abandon growth at the first sign of saturation, thinking they have reached their limit. They have not. They have reached the edge where growth must be tempered by wisdom. That wisdom is not yet articulated. It will emerge later through descent and integration. For now, growth continues, but differently. Less expansion for expansion's sake. More refinement, more maintenance, more coherence. This is the final internal objection growth raises. If I slow refinement, will I lose momentum? The spiral answers this through experience. Momentum that depends on constant acceleration is unstable. Momentum that depends on coherence is resilient. Growth teaches you to transition from pushing to holding. Holding is not stagnation. Holding is what allows bloom to occur without collapse. But bloom is not yet here. Growth is still teaching you the weight of what you have built. So growth does not end with a celebration. It ends with a question that cannot yet be answered. Can you remain yourself when expansion stops being the focus? Can you value coherence as much as progress? Can you allow the spiral to change tempo without forcing direction? This question must remain open. If it closes too soon, growth calcifies. If it stays open, the next phase can arrive cleanly. Growth is acceleration, building, expanding, but it is also containment, responsibility, and restraint. It is the phase where the spiral turns potential into structure and tests whether the structure can hold truth under pressure. If it can, the cycle will turn again. If it cannot, growth repeats until it can. That repetition is not punishment. It is instruction carried forward through consequence. The listener should not feel resolved here. They should feel oriented but unsettled. That is correct. Growth does not comfort. Growth prepares. It builds something strong enough to be lived inside, questioned, and eventually transformed. And until that transformation begins, growth remains active, pressing, and unfinished by design. If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Haret library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.